One of the most common stresses that people face is finances. There's a tremendous sense of responsibility, if you've got to provide for your family. And very often there's a lot of anxiety. What if this deal doesn't go through? What if interest rates go up? What if, I don't know, maybe the president of some country might impose tariffs on another country or stop aid to a country? All these kinds of things that could affect our bottom line. So one of the greatest tests of our faith is in the world of money. And so there's a tradition. It's not a tradition that's very big in Chabad, funnily enough. When I was recently in the States, I saw that there was a guy at the end of davening, pulled out of his tallis bag this piece of parchment, and on the piece of parchment there was a paragraph from the Torah, and he read that paragraph at the end of davening from this parchment where it was written with the same script that you would have to write a Torah. And what he was reading is what there's, as I say, there's a tradition that many communities read every single day at the end of davening. It's called Parashas Hamon, the story of the manna, which happens to be in this week's parasha. That's why we're learning about it now. And the idea of reading this portion of the manna on a daily basis is it's supposed to be like a bracha for parnasa. That if you read about the manna, it will ensure that you have the financial means that you need. Now, I think you can immediately make an association, right? You can see the link, because the psychology of the manna was that you had to trust in Hashem. I mean, it's an incredible experience when you actually think about it. When you analyze the experience of the manna in the desert, you recognize that it was an incredible test every single day. Because when it came to the manna, we're told that you'd go out in the morning and you'd collect your portion of manna. And no matter how hard you tried, you could not get any more than what was allocated to you. Right? And the Torah is very clear about it. It was a standard allocation. Everybody got, it's called an oimer, which is and then the Torah even tells us what an oimer is, what the measurement was. That's how much food you got. In very broad strokes, the Gemara tells us it's enough for 2 meals. That's what people used to eat. You used to eat in the morning, you used to eat in the evening. That's it. And then on Shabbos, you got additional manna. That's where the idea comes from, that you have 3 meals on Shabbos. It comes from the story of the manna. So imagine you go out in the morning, you collect your food. That's your food. There's no concept of a pantry. Just think about that. I don't know what it's like in your home, but could you imagine living in such a way that every single night you clear out the pantry, you clear out the fridge, and tomorrow you go buy fresh? It's a little bit unnerving. What happens if you get the munchies in the middle of the night? Now what are you going to do?
What happens if Woolies have sold out?
Exactly.
Uber Eats.
So what are you going to do? So just imagine living in that headspace, that every single day you got exactly the allocation that you needed, and you could do nothing with all the creativity and effort, investment, bartering, whatever you want. There's no way to get anything more than what's been allocated to you. At the end of the day, whatever you had is used up, and now you have to be absolutely confident that tomorrow Hashem is going to repeat the process. Because if He doesn't repeat the process tomorrow, then you've got a problem. So this whole experience of the manna was an exercise in faith in Hashem, and that's why you have this concept that people read this story on a daily basis, just to remind us that we should have faith in Hashem. Now, it's this faith in Hashem that this story of the manna is supposed to represent. That's what we're going to analyze and try to understand what is the message. What are we supposed to take out of this? Because there's no question about it that one of the most common and most frequent tests of our faith is finance. So whatever happened in the story of the manna, which is supposed to set the table for us, set the tone in terms of what it is that we're supposed to do around our income and our sustenance. So we have to work out, like, what is the deep psychology behind it. And as we examine this, we're going to discover that there are two possible ways we could see the lesson of the manna. Okay, the first way is brought in quite a number of sources. In the classical halachic works, you have it in the Beis Yosef, which becomes the precursor to the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law. You have it quoted by the Alter Rebbe. Now, what's interesting is, when the Alter Rebbe wrote his Shulchan Aruch, and he wrote about the procedures that you're supposed to follow on a daily basis in the morning, he included in his Shulchan Aruch an original version and an updated version. So in his original version, he also takes this approach that is quite common amongst the early sages. And then in his updated version, he takes another approach. So what we're going to see is there are two approaches as to how you're supposed to interpret this concept of the manna, what it's supposed to teach you. So before we do that, let me ask you, the idea that you only had exactly the amount of manna that was allocated, and you could get no extra if you kept it till the next morning. Remember, there were some people who tried their luck, and they wanted to keep some leftovers. By the time they woke up the next morning, it had rotted. We also know that on Shabbos, they received the double portion beforehand on Friday, so that you had this kind of change in the procedure to ensure that you had enough food for Shabbos. So what do you think the lesson is from, in terms of our spiritual psychology, from the concept of not getting anything more, or as the Torah says, anything less than what you deserve? What do you think the message is?
Greed.
Okay?
And understanding not to be greedy.
Not to be greedy. Okay? So let's unpack that a little bit further. So I should not be greedy. Why should I not be greedy?
Because you should be happy with everything.
I should be happy. Why should I be happy? To say that I shouldn't be greedy and if I should be happy is two sides of the same coin.
Because Hashem is have faith in Hashem.
Oh, that's it.
God will
I should
provide.
have faith. I should have faith, and the nature of my faith should be that at the end of the day, it comes from Hashem. That's the idea. At the end of the day, I need to have faith that whatever's going to land up in my bank account is going to be from Hashem. Why is that so important? Because the nature of people is to really celebrate our successes as if they're our own. And the Torah warns against this much later on in the Torah, in the book of Devarim. It warns against the person taking the attitude of Koichi va'otzem yadi asali esachai lazeh. My strength and the power of my hands made my success. Or as they like to call it in the contemporary world, I'm a self-made man. That whole notion of a self-made man is a very extreme rejection of faith. Who do you think you are? Right? If Hashem blesses something, then it works. If Hashem does not bless something, stand on your head. It's not going to help. I always think back to the story that, if you remember at the time of when we had the World Cup soccer here in South Africa, and you remember at the time one of the big fads was that people got those mirror socks with the flag of the country that you supported, that you put over the rear view mirrors of your car. So at that time there was an individual who used to come to a share that I gave, and she told me she's going to be making big money this year because she has this consignment coming in from China of these South African flag mirror socks. And the South African flag obviously is going to have the highest selling point here in the country, and she's going to make a fortune of money. What happened? The consignment got held up in customs, and they released it the day after South Africa was knocked out of the tournament. So there she was with hundreds of thousands of these units, and nobody wanted to buy them. At the end of the day, if Hashem wants you to succeed, you're going to succeed. If Hashem doesn't want you to succeed, God forbid, you could have the best plan in the entire world. It makes the most sense. Everybody agrees, people willing to invest. If Hashem doesn't want it, it's not going to happen. That's how it is. So the first lesson of the manna, this idea that you can't get more than what is allocated to you, and equally you can't get less than what is allocated to you, is an incredible lesson in faith. Faith that the bracha comes from Hashem. All I can do is create the channel through which I'll receive that bracha. But I cannot create the bracha. Okay, it's a very important perspective. And it's a very humbling perspective at the end of the day, because then a person recognizes that if I'm going to do anything in the course of trying to earn a living that clashes with the values of Torah, how can I expect them to have the bracha? So that's a position of faith. And this is exactly what the classical sources write, that by reading the story of the manna every single day, will inculcate faith in the principle that all of our income is directed from Hashem and allocated by Hashem, and the budget is the budget, and there's nothing you could do. Of course, a person could be lazy and they could not put in any effort, then they shouldn't expect Hashem's just going to give them a handout. We're not suggesting that. There's a verse in the Torah or in Tehillim that says, in the Torah that says, that Hashem will bless you in everything that you do. The implied message is you have to do something, right? You know, like the old joke about the guy dreams that he's going to win the lottery, and eventually Hashem says, okay, at least buy the ticket. Like, at the end of the day, we have a responsibility to be responsible. But faith is to know that the bracha comes from Hashem. And that's how most of the commentaries position the reasoning why you would read this Parashas Amon every single day, because you want to keep the faith alive. But, like I said, the Alter Rebbe, when he wrote his Shulchan Aruch, this particular section of laws presents two different versions in the final published version. What's called the earlier and what's called the latter version of the Shulchan Aruch. In the latter version, he takes a different approach. And he says, the lesson from the Mon is not just from the fact that you couldn't get more than you wanted and you couldn't get less than you deserved, but the lesson is that you got the Mon every single day. In other words, the lesson is consistency. Now you can imagine, in the early days, people were probably anxious. What if the Mon's not going to arrive tomorrow? And then they eventually got into a pattern that the Mon started to come every single day. And then Moshe told them, I'm just warning you, tomorrow is going to be Shabbos. There's not going to be Mon. And needless to say, there were people who panicked. You see, it was just a 1 week thing, and now it's over. And what are we going to do tomorrow? I mean, it is the Jewish default position to become anxious, even if you don't necessarily have evidence to be anxious. Well, let's worry just in case. So the lesson of the Mon is not only to believe that all of your brachas come from Hashem, but to trust that Hashem will provide those brachas on a consistent basis. Okay, so now we're seeing two aspects to what the manna is supposed to teach us. The one aspect is that we should have faith that the source of our brachas is Hashem. And the other is that we should have trust that Hashem will fulfill those brachas consistently. I should never worry. I should know that Hashem's got my back every single day. Not only that the bracha comes from Hashem and therefore He could give it to me, but rather to trust that the bracha will come from Hashem. Now those are two very different headspaces. It's a massive difference between believing that He can provide and trusting that He will provide. Two completely different headspaces. Very often you hear people speaking about the fact that they have faith. And that, I think it's probably fair to say that most of us have faith to a greater or lesser extent. And sometimes we can be quite philosophical because of the faith that we have. And we could say things like, if, God forbid, something doesn't work out the way that we intended, we could say, I have faith that Hashem knows better. Or everything that Hashem does is for the good. And that's quite a common perspective that people have or should have. We know that the Gemara, for example, tells us various stories about great sages. Things happen to them in their lives that outwardly appeared to be very negative things, and they adopted an attitude to say that Hashem knows what He's doing, and whatever Hashem does is for the good. There's the famous story of Rabbi Akiva with his rooster and his donkey and his candle, and he couldn't find a place to sleep overnight, and that saved him from being part of this terrible invasion of a city. There's the famous story of Nachum Ish Gamzu, where he was sent as a representative of the Jewish people to give this gift to the Roman leadership. And when he got there overnight at one of the inns that he was staying at, a guy had swapped out all the jewels for sand, and he thought he was going to be killed, and he said, Gamzula Tova, this is also for the good. And then Eliyahu Hanavi appears as one of the advisors to the Roman emperor and says, look, the Jews wouldn't just bring any ordinary sand. It must be miraculous sand, like the Torah says. When Abraham went to fight against the kings, that he took sand and threw it into the air and it turned into arrows. And sure enough, they tried it, and he was very handsomely rewarded for having brought this miracle sand to the king. So these are attitudes of people who say, I trust, like if things don't, I believe, if things don't go the way that I expect, there's a good reason for it, and it will still work out okay. And very often you hear people tell us this when we're dealing with some kind of a challenge in our lives. They'll say, listen, first prize obviously is that you get what you want, but if you don't get what you want, then that you have to have faith that that's what you needed. And what you want and what you need are not always the same. Trust is a completely different concept. Trust is not just to think that whatever Hashem has is part of this grand master plan, and He of course knows better than me, and therefore even if it doesn't suit my particular interests, it's in line with what Hashem wants, and therefore I have to accept it. Trust is to be absolutely confident that Hashem's going to do for me what I can appreciate as being positive. I'm not going to have to sit afterwards with a rabbi and have a whole philosophical understanding of why this had to go this way. It's going to be tachlis, it's going to be money in the bank. It's going to be good. So now what we've got to ask ourselves is, if the motivation to say this, the section of the man, is that we're supposed to develop faith in Hashem and recognize that our brachos come from Hashem, that's one kind of message, and therefore will imply that when we say this particular paragraph is in one particular context. But if we're going to say that the paragraph of the man is to teach us to have trust in Hashem, then it's going to be a different message, and it's going to apply in a different context. Let me explain to you what I mean. One of the rules about davening is that a big part of the davening is to ask for things that we need. And that's what we focus on during the Amidah. We have our whole list of things that we need, and we're entitled. We're actually entitled to ask for personal things, and very specific, very personal things. So we ask for wisdom, and we ask for health, and we ask for income, and we ask for getting rid of our enemies, etc., etc. Like very personal, very specific things. And then you get to Shema Kolenu, and you can even insert your own personal prayer of whatever's going on in your life. So asking Hashem for what we need is an integral part of prayer. In fact, the definition of prayer is to praise Hashem, to give gratitude, and to ask for what we need. That is what prayer is all about. Except, there's one time that you're not allowed to ask for what you need. When is that? On Shabbos. That's why the Amidah on Shabbos does not have any of that. You don't ask for personal needs on Shabbos. If anything, we ask for communal needs. But personal needs, not on Shabbos. So now, if the motivation behind reading this chapter about the man is that we should have faith in Hashem, that all of our brachos come from Hashem, how often do you have to have faith?
All the time.
All the time, 24/7. Faith is a constant. Doesn't matter if it's relevant in the circumstances or not. Faith is a constant. So, because faith is a position of how I understand the world. So to understand that the world operates in such a way that the brachos come from Hashem, that is consistent 24/7. Shabbos or no Shabbos. If the reason I'm supposed to read the paragraph about the manna is to inculcate faith in Hashem, then I need to read that paragraph every single day. Because every single day I need to develop my faith in Hashem. Whether or not this week is going to be a financially difficult week makes no difference. The fact is, I should always have faith that my brachos come from Hashem. But if the objective of reading this paragraph is that I should develop trust meaning that things will work out well meaning in a way that I appreciate as well. So when is that relevant? When do I need trust? I need trust when things are about to happen. In other words, if I've already closed the deal for this month and I don't have to worry again about finances for this month, then I don't need trust in Hashem for this month because I'm already there. It's already been taken care of. Nothing's challenging me. Do I still have faith that the bracha comes from Hashem? Absolutely. But I don't need to activate this very profound experience of trust. Whereas, if I haven't yet made it to the end of the month and I still have a couple of tentative deals on the table, Or I still have a product that's in production and I'm hoping that it's going to come out. Or the consignment that's stuck in customs and I'm hoping they'll release it in time for my responsibilities to my customers. So now I need trust. Then I've got to pull out my paragraph about the manna and I've got to read it. So I remind myself that I should trust that, don't worry, even though I can't see my way clear, Hashem's got this. He's in control. He has my best interests at heart and he's going to provide for me. If that's the case, do I say it on Shabbos? No. Because I'll never have a situation on Shabbos where I'm supposed to be thinking about my bottom line. Shabbos is not the day to focus on what I need. So if I go with that particular perspective, then I'm going to not say this paragraph of the manna on a Shabbos. Okay, so using that as an illustration of the fact that these are two completely different technologies. Now, we have to understand this trust principle just a little bit better before we can go into starting to unpack, what it actually teaches us, what the manna actually teaches us. Because this could be one of the most valuable lessons for us to learn in terms of how we manage our finances and our businesses. It's very important to have that clarity that all of the bracha comes from Hashem, and it's equally important to have that trust that Hashem will make things turn out well. Now that raises a question for us. Just because I have a good attitude, why should that force Hashem's hand to make things turn out well? In other words, if you tell me that I have to have faith in Hashem, and therefore I have to recognize that all of the blessings come from Hashem, I get that. Of course that makes sense. But if you're going to tell me that there's a principle called trust in Hashem, I trust that Hashem will make things turn out well, on what basis? Maybe I'm missing 90% of the picture over here. What gives me the right to decide that this is how things should pan out, and therefore I'm going to trust in Hashem that they will pan out that way? And of course the biggest question of all is, why does Hashem have to listen to me? Right? It's like a weird principle. Just because I have a particular outcome that I think is the best outcome, that is reason enough why that outcome has to happen. And if I don't believe that outcome is going to happen, then I don't have trust. And you're telling me I have to have trust in Hashem. So how does it work? One of the things that we know in Judaism is that Hashem always behaves towards us in a system that we call midah keneged midah, which means that Hashem responds to us aligned with how we behave. So for example, if I'm very generous to other people, then I can anticipate that Hashem will be generous to me. If I am very forgiving of other people, I can imagine that Hashem will be forgiving of me. In fact, there's a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos in the Ethics of the Fathers that says that the way that Hashem does things is that He pays people. Pay is a very broad, almost ambiguous term. It could be pay you with positive, or could be pay you with negative, depending on the circumstances. So it says, midaita v'shaloi midaita, whether you're aware of it or not. And one of the explanations of that is that what Hashem does is He waits to hear how you decide to act towards somebody else. And based on that, Hashem decides how to act towards you. So midaita, what you had in your mind, in your judgment of somebody else, shaloi midaita is what Hashem decides without your knowledge in how He's going to deal with you. Okay, so that's the principle. So midah keneged midah. Hashem deals with us in the way that we deal with others or with situations. So now, how easy is it when you're feeling a little bit of financial pressure? How easy is it to live with confidence that everything's going to turn out well? It's the most difficult thing in the world, especially if you understand the trends, you understand the markets, you have experience in this particular business, you know the customer base, all the information that we have in our minds can very easily convince us this is not going to work. So to have that confidence in Hashem, not only that Hashem is the source of my brachas, but that Hashem is not bound to the circumstances and can make everything turn out well, that takes a tremendous amount of investment. And the investment is getting my head to a place that I recognize I have absolutely no control, Hashem has all the control, and that Hashem cares about me and loves me enough to make things turn out well for me. If a person can get themselves into that space, that they actually have that level of trust, they deserve something special to happen to them, because it's so difficult to get there. And therefore, as you can see, trust is a mechanism that is a response to a situation, because it's when I need to call on that very deep level of trust, that's when I'll work on myself, have that confidence, and that in turn will elicit the bracha from Hashem. illustrating to me that trust is situation specific. So what do we know? Faith is 24/7. You always have faith that your brachas come from Hashem. Trust is situation specific. It's when there is some kind of a crisis, that's when I have to develop this trust in Hashem, which in turn will release the brachas. But understanding now that there's these two different technologies of how we engage with Hashem, particularly around finances, will help us to delve a little bit more deeply into what attitude we're actually supposed to take in the world of business and self-sustenance, etc., which we'll unpack over the next two lessons of Mitzvah Hashem.